The crystal spires of Velinara Prime reached toward the stars like frozen lightning. The capital world of the mighty Velinari Empire sparkled with the light of 1,000 suns. Each tower was carved from pure starstone and filled with the most advanced technology in the galaxy. The Empire had ruled this sector for 3,000 years, and their pride showed in every gleaming surface. Empress Lirale Velthara sat upon her throne made of compressed diamond. Her silver hair flowed like liquid. Mercury and her violet eyes held the cold fire of ancient nobility. She wore robes woven from light itself, and a crown that bent space around it. The Empress ruled over 1,000 star systems with absolute power. Her word was law across countless worlds. The great hall buzzed with activity as nobles and advisors moved through the chamber. Their pointed ears and elegant features marked them as the superior race they believed themselves to be. High Advisor Seraphina Nightwhisper glided between groups of courtiers, her blue skin shimmering with embedded crystals. General Valencia Starweaver stood near the war room entrance, her ceremonial armor gleaming with victory medals from 100 conquered worlds. Captain Lisa Morgan of the human exploration vessel Terra's Hope walked through the massive doors. The guards had wanted to search her, but diplomatic immunity protected her visit. She carried a datapad in her hands, and worry lines creased. Her face, the human, looked small and crude. Next to the towering elegance of the Velinari court, her brown hair was tied back in a simple knot, and her blue uniform was practical rather than beautiful. The Empress looked down at the human with barely hidden disgust. Humans were a young race that had only discovered faster than light travel 2 centuries ago. They controlled perhaps 50 star systems compared to the Empire's 1,000. Their technology was bulky and inefficient. Their ships looked like flying scrap metal next to Velinari crystal vessels. Lisa bowed respectfully before speaking. Your Imperial Majesty, I bring urgent news from human space. Our scientists have detected a cosmic phenomenon approaching this region. It threatens all life in its path, including your Empire. Laughter rippled through the court. The idea that humans could detect something the advanced Velinari sensors had missed was amusing. Several nobles whispered jokes about primitive mammal senses. High Advisor Seraphina stepped forward with a mocking smile. Human speaks of threats to the mighty Velinari. How entertaining. Perhaps next, the insects will warn us of danger from the void. Lisa ignored the insults and activated her datapad. A holographic projection filled the center of the hall, showing star charts and energy readings. The display was crude by Velinari standards, but the data was clear. A wave of dark energy was consuming entire star systems, leaving nothing but empty space behind. We call it the void tide, Lisa explained, pointing to the advancing darkness. It devours everything in its path. Our deep space monitoring network detected it 18 months ago. The wave moves faster than light itself, and cannot be stopped by any known technology. The projection showed consumed worlds. In the calculated path of destruction, the tide was heading directly for the heart of the Velinari Empire with less than 2 years before arrival. Lisa adjusted the display to show evacuation routes and safe zones that human scientists had identified. Your Empire lies directly in its path, Lisa continued. We estimate you have 20 months before the tide reaches your outer territories. Humanity offers assistance in evacuation efforts. Our mobile shipyards and jump gate networks could help relocate your people to safety. The laughter grew louder. General Valencia stepped forward, her hand resting on her ceremonial sword. The suggestion that the mighty Velinari needed rescue from inferior humans was beyond insulting. It was absurd. You dare suggest we flee from shadows, the general said, her voice dripping with contempt. The Velinari have faced 1,000 enemies and crushed them all. Your primitive fears mean nothing to us. Lisa maintained her composure, despite the hostility she had expected. This reaction, but the data was too important to ignore. She enhanced the hologram to show more detail about the approaching phenomenon. This is not an enemy you can fight, Lisa said quietly. It consumes the very fabric of space itself. 3 civilizations have already fallen to the tide: the Kethmori dynasty, the Zul'Karan Republic, the First Hegemony, all gone as if they never existed. Lirale rose from her throne, her presence commanding instant silence. The human's audacity in bringing such ridiculous claims to her court demanded response. She walked down the crystal steps until she stood before Lisa, her violet eyes blazing with imperial wrath. "You come before us with tales of cosmic doom," the Empress said, her voice echoing through the hall. "You speak of evacuation, as if the eternal Velinary Empire could somehow be threatened by empty space. You offer aid, as if your crude ships could carry our superior civilization to safety." The Empress gestured dismissively at the holographic display. "Your primitive instruments show us shadows and you call them death. Your simple minds cannot comprehend the power we wield. We who have mastered the fundamental forces of reality, we who bend space itself to our will." Lisa tried once more to explain the urgency. "Your Majesty, this is not about pride or power. The void tide cannot be reasoned with or defeated. It simply erases everything in its path. Please examine our data. Your own scientists could verify these findings." Serafina laughed coldly. The High Advisor had spent decades studying inferior species and their pathetic attempts at science. Human technology was barely more advanced than steam engines. Their mathematics were crude approximations of true understanding. "The mammals seek to spread panic and chaos among us," she announced. "They hope to weaken our resolve with imaginary threats. Perhaps they believe we will abandon our worlds, in fear leaving them free to claim our territories." General Valencia nodded in agreement. "This is clearly a psychological warfare attempt by the humans. They lack the strength to challenge us directly, so they resort to deception and manipulation. Their crude minds cannot conceive of honest conflict." Press Lirale made her final pronouncement. The mighty Velinary bow to no threat, least of all imaginary ones conjured by lesser species. "Your presence pollutes our sacred halls. Leave immediately, and never return with such absurd fantasies." Lisa reached into her uniform and withdrew a small crystal data storage device. She placed it on the marble floor before the throne. "This contains all our research data and calculations. Please at least examine the evidence before dismissing it. The lives of billions depend on understanding this threat." The Empress gestured to her guards. "Remove this creature from our sight. Burn that device without examination. We will not contaminate our knowledge with human delusions." As the guards escorted Lisa toward the exit, she made one final desperate plea. "Pride has been the downfall of many great civilizations, Your Majesty. Do not let it destroy yours as well." The massive doors closed behind her. With a sound like thunder, the Empress ordered the data crystal incinerated immediately. Its ashes were scattered to the solar winds, without a single Velinary scientist examining its contents. The court returned to its normal activities, dismissing the human warning as the desperate lie of an inferior species. 18 months passed since Captain Lisa Morgan left Velinara Prime in disgrace. The Outer Rim monitoring stations of the Velinary Empire began detecting strange energy readings from the Galactic Edge Station. Commanders dismissed these readings as equipment failures or solar interference. The sophistication Velinary sensors had never shown such bizarre patterns before. Captain Amy Rodriguez commanded the human survey ship New Horizons as it patrolled the border between human and Velinary space. Her crew monitored deep space communications and tracked stellar phenomena. The ship was small and functional, with thick armor plating and powerful sensor arrays designed for long-range observation missions. Amy watched her sensor displays with growing horror as impossible readings flooded her screens. The Kepler 442 system had been there yesterday with 3 inhabited Velinary worlds and over 2 billion people. Today, her instruments showed only empty space. The planets had not been destroyed, they had simply ceased to exist, as if they had never been there at all. The void tide appeared on her main screen as a wall of absolute darkness moving through space at incredible speed. It consumed everything in its path, leaving no debris or radiation signature behind. The phenomenon defied every known law of physics, but the evidence was undeniable. 3 worlds full of life had been erased from reality. Ami immediately broadcast emergency warnings on all Velinary frequencies. Her Communications officer transmitted the real-time footage of the vanishing star system, along with detailed sensor data. The human ship had recorded the entire event from a safe distance of 12 light-years. The destruction took less than 6 hours. To complete, the Velinary monitoring stations received the human transmissions, but Imperial policy demanded they be ignored or jammed. Human communications were considered security threats by default. The operators assumed the footage was some form of advanced propaganda or terrorist disinformation campaign designed to create panic on Velinara Prime. The first reports began filtering in from the outer territories. Colonial governors reported lost contact with several mining worlds in research stations. The Imperial Navy assumed these were routine communication failures, or perhaps minor rebellions. The vast distances involved made immediate investigation impossible. Empress Lirale continued to refuse acknowledgement of any threat beyond her borders. Her court focused on internal politics and expansion plans for the next century. The Emperor had recently announced plans to claim another 3 star systems from the neutral zone. Imperial shipyards worked around the clock building new crystal warships. High Advisor Serafina received disturbing reports from border sectors, but dismissed them as human sabotage attempts. She convinced the Empress that the lost colonies were victims of terrorist attacks using advanced cloaking technology. The advisor recommended military action against human settlements in retaliation. General Valencia prepared for war against the humans, believing they had somehow developed weapons capable of making entire worlds invisible. Her tactical staff drew up invasion plans targeting major human colonies. The general saw this as an opportunity to finally crush the inferior species once and for all. The orders came down through Imperial command channels: attack human space and recover the missing worlds. General Valencia assembled the largest fleet in Velinary history, 300 crystal warships, accompanied by 1,000 support vessels. The Armada represented the peak of Imperial military power. Valencia led her massive fleet toward the human colony of New Geneva, expecting to find advanced cloaking technology or hidden superweapons. Instead, her force encountered something that shattered their understanding of reality. The Void Tide had reached the Centauri cluster and was consuming Velinary worlds in real time. The general watched through her flagship's crystal viewing ports as 3 major worlds simply vanished. The planets did not explode or burn. They faded from existence like shadows at dawn, leaving nothing but empty space where billions of people had lived. The sight drove several of her crew members to complete madness. Valencia's fleet fired every weapon they possessed at the advancing darkness. Planet-killing beam weapons simply disappeared into the void without effect. Nuclear missiles vanished as if they had never been launched. The most powerful military force in the galaxy was helpless against this cosmic phenomenon. The surviving ships fled in complete disorder as the Void Tide continued its advance. Valencia barely escaped, with a quarter of her original fleet. The rest had been consumed along with the star systems they tried to defend. Her report to the Imperial Court was met with stunned silence. For the first time in 3,000 years, the Velinary Empire faced something they could not defeat through superior technology or military might. The court was forced to acknowledge that the human warnings had been accurate. The pride of the Empire began to crack under the weight of impossible reality. Meanwhile, human ships appeared throughout Velinary space carrying not weapons, but rescue equipment. Captain Lisa Morgan returned aboard the massive evacuation vessel Sanctuary, equipped with refugee processing facilities and life support systems for millions of displaced beings. The ship was ugly and functional, but it represented Hoklisa, BROADCAST, on all Imperial frequencies, offering assistance to any Velinary civilians who wished to evacuate to safer regions. Human space had been preparing for this moment since the first warnings were issued. Mobile colonies and temporary habitats waited in distant sectors beyond the tide's projected path. The Empress still struggled to accept help from the species she had Dismissed as inferior, the idea of Velinari refugees living on human charity was almost unbearable to contemplate, but the reports from General Valencia could not be ignored. The impossible was happening and her empire was dying. Imperial scientists finally began examining human data about the void tide phenomenon. The mathematics were crude by Velinari standards, but the conclusions were terrifyingly accurate. The humans had correctly predicted the tide's path, speed, and behavior using their primitive monitoring network. Star Rebecca Clark arrived on Velinara Prime. With a small team of human researchers, she carried detailed analysis of the phenomena and proposals for evacuation procedures. The Velinari court received her with barely concealed desperation, disguised as diplomatic courtesy. Rebecca explained that the void tide was not a weapon or natural disaster, but something far worse. It was a cosmic antibody triggered by civilizations that grew too large and consumed too much energy. The universe itself was responding to the Velinari Empire's 3,000-year expansion. The data was overwhelming. Previous tides had occurred throughout galactic history, always targeting the dominant civilization of each era. The only survivors were species that learned to reduce their energy signatures and disperse their populations before the cleansing wave arrived. High Advisor Serafina led a faction demanding they fight the tide using experimental superweapons they proposed, channeling the power of entire stars into focused beam attacks. Military trials proved futile, as the most powerful energy weapons vanished without trace into the advancing darkness. General Valencia found herself working alongside human commanders. For the first time in her career, Admiral Kate Sullivan of the evacuation fleet shared tactical expertise about rapid population relocation. The cooperation felt wrong to Valencia, but the alternative was watching her people. Captain Amy Rodriguez continued monitoring the tide's advance while coordinating rescue operations. Her survey ship guided Velinari civilian transports away from the danger zone. The human vessels looked crude and primitive, but they possessed something the elegant Velinari ships lacked. They could be rapidly reconfigured and mass-produced. The evacuation efforts revealed fundamental differences between human and Velinari approaches to technology. Velinari civilization was built around massive crystalline structures that could not be easily moved. Human technology was modular and portable, designed for frontier conditions. Cultural barriers created constant friction, as proud Velinari nobles struggled to accept refuge aboard human vessels. The idea of abandoning their perfect crystal cities for cramped metal corridors was deeply traumatic. Many chose to remain on doomed worlds, rather than suffer such indignity. Princess Celestine Moonblade, younger sister of Empress Lirelei, began questioning everything she had been taught about human inferiority. She worked directly with human evacuation coordinators and saw their genuine desire to help people. They had no obligation to save. The princess formed an unlikely friendship with Captain Lisa Morgan as they organized refugee processing centers. Lisa treated Celestine with respect but not servility, showing her that strength could exist without arrogance. The human captain became a bridge between two very different civilizations. More worlds fell to the advancing tide each day. The outer provinces of the empire were already gone, and the phenomenon was accelerating toward the core systems. Empress Lirelei finally issued a formal alliance request. The first time in Velinari history they had asked another species for aid. The request was transmitted across human space within hours. Ships and supplies began moving toward Velinari territory from dozens of human worlds. The response overwhelmed Imperial expectations. These crude mammals were mobilizing their entire civilization to help people who had scorned them. The void tide consumed system after system as it advanced toward the heart of the Velinari Empire. Empress Lirelei faced a choice that challenged everything she believed about her people's superiority. She could accept help from the humans she had scorned, or watch her entire civilization vanish into cosmic darkness. Darkness. Dear Rebecca Clark arrived on Velinara Prime with critical information about the approaching phenomenon. Her research team had studied the tide for 2 years and discovered its true nature. The cosmic wave was not random destruction, but a universal response to civilizations that grew beyond sustainable limits. Stood before the imperial court, explaining concepts that shattered Velinary understanding of their place in the universe. The tide was like an immune system that activated when any species consumed too much galactic energy. The Velinary Empire, with its 1,000 star systems, had triggered this automatic reset function. The data showed that previous tides had occurred throughout galactic history, wiping out dominant civilizations when they became too large. Each wave left the galaxy mostly empty, allowing new species to evolve and develop. The cycle had repeated dozens of times over millions of years. The only way to survive was to become invisible to the phenomenon, Rebecca explained. Civilizations needed to reduce their energy signatures, disperse their populations, and cease large-scale industrial activities. The proud Velinary would have to abandon everything that made them feel superior. Rempress Lirale struggled with this revelation. Her entire identity was built on the Empire's eternal expansion and technological dominance. The idea of reducing their civilization to scattered colonies felt like admitting fundamental failure. The Empress had been raised to believe in Velinary's superiority over all other species. Advisor Serafina led a faction demanding they fight the tide using their most powerful weapons. She proposed gathering the entire Imperial fleet and directing every available energy source at the approaching darkness. Surely the combined might of 1,000 worlds could stop this phenomenon. Military trials proved the futility of direct confrontation. Planet killing beam weapons simply vanished into the tide without creating any detectable effect. Nuclear warheads disappeared as if they had never existed. The cosmic phenomenon operated beyond the reach of conventional physics. General Valencia found herself humbled by her recent encounter with the void tide. Her massive fleet had been reduced to scattered survivors in a matter of hours. The experience forced her to acknowledge that some threats could not be defeated through superior fight. General began working with human commanders to coordinate evacuation efforts. Admiral Kate Sullivan of the Human Evacuation Fleet shared tactical expertise about rapid population movement. Valencia learned that human military doctrine emphasized adaptability over raw power. The collaboration proved challenging at every level. Velinary technology was based on massive, elegant crystalline structures that had been built to last for millennia. The beautiful cities and orbital platforms could not be easily dismantled or relocated. Human technology appeared crude and primitive to Velinary eyes, but it possessed critical advantages. The modular design allowed rapid reconfiguration and mass production. Human ships could be built quickly and modified for specialized tasks as needed. Cultural barriers created constant friction between the two species. Proud Velinary nobles struggled to accept refuge aboard cramped human vessels. The elegant crystal chambers they were accustomed to were replaced by functional metal corridors with basic life support systems. Captain Lisa Morgan worked tirelessly as a liaison between the species. She helped evacuate Velinary civilians while managing complex cultural tensions. The human captain had become a symbol of cooperation between former enemies. Lisa formed an unlikely friendship with Princess Celestine Moonblade, who began questioning everything she had learned about human inferiority. The princess saw genuine compassion in the human evacuation efforts. These crude mammals were risking their lives to save people who had mocked them. Princess Celestine emerged as a voice of reason among the Velinary refugees. She worked with human social coordinators like Dr. Sarah Mitchell to help her people adapt to their new circumstances. The princess learned that survival was more important than pride. The evacuation process revealed fundamental differences in how the two species approached problems. Velinary culture emphasized perfection and permanence, while human society valued adaptability and pragmatism. These different philosophies created both conflict and opportunity. Dar Rebecca Clark discovered that the tide's advance could be temporarily slowed by creating gravity anchors. Massive concentrations of dark matter forced the phenomenon to work around them rather than through them. This bought precious time but required enormous sacrifice. The anchor stations needed constant maintenance and would be consumed when the tides finally passed through them. Anyone operating the equipment would face certain death. The knowledge that someone would have to stay behind cast a shadow over the evacuation efforts. Lirelei faced impossible decisions about what could be saved from her dying empire. 3,000 years of accumulated knowledge, art, and culture could not fit aboard the available evacuation ships. Choices had to be made about what was most important. The Imperial Archives contained the complete history and scientific knowledge of the Velinari civilization. Ancient artifacts from their homeworld carried cultural significance beyond measure. The crown jewels and ceremonial objects were symbols of imperial authority. Human evacuation protocols prioritized living beings over material possessions. Captain Amy Rodriguez explained that people could rebuild their civilization, but nothing could replace lost lives. The practical human approach conflicted with Velinari values. More refugee ships arrived from human space carrying supplies and equipment for the massive relocation effort. The vessels were ugly and functional, but they represented hope for the displaced Velinari population. Commander Nicole Thompson brought news from the outer territories, where the evacuation was proceeding slowly. Many Velinari chose to remain on their doomed worlds rather than abandon their perfect cities. The cultural trauma of displacement was almost unbearable. The human commander worked with Velinari officials to establish temporary colonies in safe sectors beyond the tide's projected path. These frontier settlements would be crude by imperial standards, but they offered survival for the displaced population. Princess Celestine toured the refugee processing centers and saw human efficiency in action. The evacuation coordinators worked without rest to provide food, shelter, and medical care for millions of displaced beings. No one was turned away. Regardless of their previous attitudes, the princess began to understand that true strength was not about dominance, but about the willingness to help others. Even when they had shown only contempt, the humans were demonstrating qualities that Velinari culture had never valued. General Valencia led integrated forces protecting the evacuation routes. Her crystal warships worked alongside human escort vessels to ensure safe passage for the refugee convoys. The cooperation between former enemies created new tactical possibilities. The joint operations revealed that human and Velinari technologies could complement each other effectively. Human adaptability combined with Velinari precision created capabilities neither species possessed alone. The alliance was becoming more than just emergency cooperation. Time was running out as the void tide accelerated toward the core systems of the Empire. Empress Lirelei finally made the most difficult decision of her reign. She would formally dissolve the Velinari Empire and accept full partnership with human. Announcement shocked both species. The mighty empire that had ruled for 3 millennia was voluntarily ending its existence. The Empress acknowledged that pride and arrogance had brought her people to the edge of extinction. The formal alliance ceremony took place aboard the human evacuation ship Sanctuary, with representatives from both civilizations. Empress Lirelei signed documents that made her people equals rather than superiors. The ancient hierarchy was dissolved. Princess Celestine spoke for the younger generation of Velinari, who had learned to see humans as partners rather than inferiors. She thanked Captain Lisa, Morgan, and the other human heroes who had risked everything to save former enemies. The ceremony was broadcast across both human and Velinari space, showing 2 species united against cosmic destruction. The images of cooperation replaced centuries of mutual distrust and cultural superiority. The void tide accelerated as it approached the heart of the Velinari Empire, forcing desperate choices about what could be saved. The cosmic phenomenon now consumed entire star systems in hours rather than days. The evacuation had become a race against impossible odds. Dr. Rebecca Clark worked frantically to establish gravity anchor stations that could slow the tide's advance. The massive dark matter concentrations required precise placement and constant maintenance. Each anchor bot precious time, but demanded ultimate sacrifice from those who operated them. Empress Lirale made her most difficult decision in 3,000 years of imperial history. She would personally remain on Velinara Prime to maintain the primary gravity anchor, knowing it meant certain death. The Empress, who had once laughed at human warnings, now prepared to die saving her people. The announcement shocked both civilizations. Velinari nobles had never imagined their Empress would choose death over evacuation. Human commanders were amazed by this act of selfless courage from someone they had considered arrogant and heartless. Captain Amy Rodriguez volunteered to command the anchor station alongside the Empress, saying no one should face the void alone. Her small survey ship, New Horizons, was modified with gravity manipulation equipment. The unlikely partnership between human and Velinari became a symbol of their new alliance. The evacuation effort faced its greatest test when the tide reached the heavily populated Arcadia sector. Commander Nicole Thompson of the transport ship Guardian faced an impossible choice. Her vessel could either save the Velinari Cultural Center containing irreplaceable art and history, or rescue 50,000 additional refugees. Nicole chose the people without hesitation. The cultural artifacts were loaded onto automated cargo pods, while living beings filled the transport's passenger compartments. Her decision earned respect from even the most traditional Velinari nobles who began to understand human values. The cultural center contained 3 millennia of accumulated knowledge, including the original archives from the Velinari homeworld. Ancient sculptures, paintings, and musical compositions represented the soul of their civilization. The loss was devastating, but Nicole knew people could create new art if they survived. General Valencia led the final military action of her career, but this was not a battle against enemies. It was a massive rearguard operation, protecting the last evacuation ships. Her forces now included both Velinari crystal warships and human escort vessels working in perfect coordination. The integrated fleet fought against time itself, rather than conventional enemies. They held defensive positions around evacuation routes, ensuring no refugee ship was left behind. Valencia had learned that true military victory sometimes meant successful retreat rather than glorious conquest. Prince Celestine emerged as a leader. Among the displaced Velinari population, she worked with human social coordinators to help her people adapt to their new reality. The princess had learned to value practical solutions over elegant traditions. Celestine established refugee councils that included both species working together to solve problems. The councils managed food distribution, medical care, and psychological support for millions of displaced beings. The princess discovered that leadership meant service rather than command. The evacuation ships carried Velinari refugees to dozens of human worlds where temporary settlements were being constructed. The colonies would be crude by imperial standards, but they offered safety beyond the tide's reach. Survival was more important than comfort. Dr. Sarah Mitchell worked with Velinari psychologists to help refugees cope with the trauma of losing their entire civilization. Many suffered from depression and despair at seeing their perfect crystal cities abandoned forever. The cultural shock was almost unbearable. Human settlements opened their doors to Velinari refugees, despite having every reason to turn them away. The same species that had been dismissed as inferior, mammals, now provided shelter and aid without asking for anything in return. The generosity was overwhelming. The climate came as Velinara Prime itself faced the approaching tide. Empress Lirale and Captain Amy worked together in the gravity anchor control center, deep beneath the Crystal Palace. Their combined expertise kept the massive dark matter concentrations stable. The anchor station drew power from the planet's core, creating a gravitational distortion that forced the void tide to slow its advance. The effect bought the last evacuation ships critical hours to escape with their precious cargo of refugees. Lale's final transmission was broadcast across both human and Velinari space. The Empress spoke with quiet dignity about the fall of her empire and the mistakes that had led to this catastrophe. She apologized for her arrogance and called on her people to learn from humanity's wisdom. the Empress acknowledged that the Velinari had believed themselves superior when they were simply different. She praised the humans, who had risked everything to save former enemies, and urged her people to build something better from the ashes of the old empire. Captain Amy Rodriguez stood beside the Empress. As Velinara Prime faced its final moments, the two commanders maintained the gravity anchor until the very end, ensuring that every refugee ship escaped to safety. Their sacrifice would be remembered by both civilizations. The Crystal Palace began to shake as gravitational forces tore at the planet's structure. The anchor station held firm, even as the beautiful spires cracked and fell. The death of the capital world marked the end of the greatest empire in galactic history. General Valencia received the final transmission from Velinara Prime while protecting the last convoy of refugee ships. Her fleet maintained formation around the evacuation vessels as they jumped to safety in human space. The military operation had achieved its ultimate objective. The void tide consumed Velinara Prime in minutes, rather than hours. The planet that had ruled 1,000 worlds simply ceased to exist, leaving only empty space where the Crystal Palace had stood. The empire was gone, but its people survived. Princess Celestine wept for her sister's sacrifice, while coordinating refugee operations aboard the human command ship Sanctuary. The princess had lost everything she had known, but gained understanding of what really mattered in the universe. The integrated defense fleet regrouped in human space where refugee processing centers worked around the clock to provide aid for the displaced Velinari. Millions of beings who had once ruled the galaxy now depended on human charity for survival. Rebecca Clark analyzed data from the anchor stations and discovered that the tide's advance had been slowed by almost 30%. The sacrifice of Empress Lirale and Captain Amy had saved countless additional lives by buying extra evacuation time. The final refugee ship arrived at New Geneva, carrying the last survivors from the Empire's outer territories. Commander Lisa Morgan personally welcomed each group of displaced beings. Her small exploration vessel had become the symbol of hope between species. The evacuation was complete, but the cost had been enormous. An entire civilization had been reduced to whatever could fit in cargo holds. The Velinari Empire existed now only in the memories of its scattered survivors. Valencia assembled her remaining forces for a new mission, protecting the refugee settlements from potential threats. The integrated fleet would patrol the border regions, ensuring that no hostile forces could threaten the displaced populations. Princess Celestine addressed the refugees gathered in processing centers across human space. She spoke of building something new from the ruins of the old empire. The princess called for cooperation between species and the end of racial superiority. The speech was broadcast to both human and Velinari populations, showing that leadership could emerge from tragedy. The princess had learned that true nobility came from service to others rather than dominance over them. Dr. Sarah Mitchell established psychological support networks to help refugees cope with their losses. Many struggled with depression and survivor guilt, while others found new purpose in building integrated communities. The human social worker had seen similar traumas among displaced populations throughout history. She knew that recovery would take time, but people could rebuild their lives if given proper support and hope for the future. The last stand had ended not in military victory, but in successful rescue. The alliance between humans and Velinari had saved millions of lives from cosmic destruction. The foundation for a new type of civilization had been laid in the ashes of empire. 6 months after the fall of Velinara Prime, the surviving Velinari had been scattered across dozens of human worlds and space stations. The once mighty empire existed now only as refugee communities, struggling to rebuild their lives from nothing. Their entire civilization had been reduced to what could fit in evacuation ship cargo holds. Princess Celestine had become the unofficial leader of her displaced people, working with human officials to establish permanent settlements. The largest community was New Velinara, built on the frontier world of Haven. Governor Maria Santos had donated vast tracts of land for the refugee colony. The settlement looked nothing like the Crystal Spires, of the old empire's simple prefabricated buildings housed thousands of families, while community centers provided education and cultural activities. The architecture was functional rather than beautiful, but it offered hope for the future. Many Velinari struggled with the loss of their technological superiority and imperial grandeur. Admiral Thalassimungo led a group of refugees who could not adapt to their new circumstances. They spent their days mourning the past rather than building toward tomorrow. Captain Lisa Morgan had become a legend among both species as the human who tried to save an empire. Her exploration vessel, Terra's Hope, now served as a mobile embassy between the scattered refugee communities. Lisa worked tirelessly to maintain unity among the displaced populations. Joint Research Initiative brought together scientists from both civilizations to study the void tide phenomenon. Dr. Rebecca Clark led teams of human and Velinari researchers working to understand cosmic cycles and prevent future catastrophes. Their combined knowledge created new possibilities. The research revealed disturbing truths about galactic history. The void tide was not a unique event, but part of a universal cycle that repeated every few million years. Other civilizations in distant sectors would face the same fate unless they learned to control their expansion. Genera Valencia had traded her vast crystal fleets for a small force of integrated vessels. Human and Velinari crews worked side by side, learning that cooperation could be more effective than overwhelming firepower. Her tactical genius adapted to new realities. Valencia established training programs for the next generation of defenders who would protect refugee settlements from potential threats. The integrated forces combined human adaptability with Velinari precision creating capabilities. Neither species possessed a lone. Princess Celestine toured the refugee settlements and saw remarkable examples of adaptation. Former imperial nobles worked alongside human farmers to grow food for their communities. Velinari engineers learned to repair crude human machinery. When elegant crystal technology was unavailable, the princess discovered that many refugees had found new purpose in their simplified lives. Former courtiers became teachers, sharing knowledge with human children. Velinari artists created new forms of expression using human materials and techniques. Dr. Rebecca Clark made a breakthrough discovery while analyzing tide patterns. The cosmic phenomenon could be predicted and potentially avoided if civilizations learned to monitor their energy consumption. Galactic awareness might prevent future catastrophes. The research led to development of early warning systems that could detect dangerous expansion patterns. Rebecca worked with both human and Velinari scientists to create monitoring networks that would protect other species from triggering their own destruction. Captain Amy Rodriguez had become a symbol of sacrifice after her death alongside Empress Lirelei on Velinara Prime. The human commander was honored by both civilizations for choosing to face the void with a former enemy. Rather than abandoning her to die alone, memorial was built at New Velinara, honoring all those who died during the evacuation, human and Velinari. Names were carved together on crystal and metal plaques, showing that heroism transcended species boundaries. Commander Nicole Thompson continued her evacuation work by establishing supply routes between refugee settlements. Her transport ships carried food, medicine, and equipment to communities struggling with frontier conditions. The human commander had saved millions of lives. Nicole discovered that many Velinari possessed skills that were valuable in their new circumstances. Former palace guards became excellent security officers, while imperial administrators adapted their talents to colonial management. The refugee communities began to thrive as they adapted to frontier life. Mixed settlements emerged where humans and Velinari lived as neighbors rather than separate species. Children from both cultures played together, creating friendships that transcended old prejudices. Princess Celestine worked with human educators to establish schools that taught both human practicality and Velinari knowledge. The integrated curriculum created a new generation that valued cooperation over competition. Dr. Sarah Mitchell documented the remarkable psychological recovery of the refugee populations. Many Velinari, who had suffered from depression and despair, found new meaning in building integrated communities. The shared struggle created bonds stronger than racial differences. Social worker established support networks that helped both species cope with trauma while building toward a better future. Recovery programs emphasized practical skills and community involvement rather than dwelling on past losses. General Valencia received reports of other threatened civilizations. In distant sectors, the Zephyrian Dominion was showing signs of dangerous expansion that might trigger another void tide there. Emperor dismissed warnings, just as Empress Lirelei had done. The general proposed a new mission to seek out other threatened species and offer aid before their hubris destroyed them. The integrated fleet would carry the message of cooperation to civilizations that still believed in racial superiority. Princess Celestine and Captain Lisa Morgan were chosen to co-command this critical mission. The joint vessel Warning was built using both human and Velinari technology, representing the birth of a truly integrated civilization. The ship launched from New Velinara with a crew of volunteers from both species. Their mission was to find other civilizations approaching the expansion threshold and offer assistance before cosmic destruction claimed them. The Warning arrived at the borders of Zephyrian space, where Emperor Krathvel ruled over 800 star systems. With absolute authority, the proud ruler listened to their warnings with the same dismissive arrogance that Empress Lirelei had once shown. Emperor Krathvel laughed at the suggestion that his mighty empire could be threatened by cosmic forces. His courtiers mocked the idea that refugees from a destroyed civilization could offer wisdom to their superiors. Princess Celestine and Captain Lisa exchanged knowing looks as they faced the familiar scene. They had lived through this exact situation before, but now they were prepared to save those who could not save themselves. The Zephyrian Emperor ordered them to leave immediately, but the Warning remained in orbit, broadcasting continuous transmissions about the approaching danger. Some younger Zephyrians began to listen, despite their leader's prohibitions. Dr. Rebecca Clark transmitted all the research data about void tide cycles and expansion thresholds. The scientific evidence was overwhelming, but pride and arrogance blinded the leadership to the truth. The Warning established contact with Zephyrian scientists and military officers who were willing to examine the evidence secretly. Many recognized the patterns described in the human and Velinari data. Princess Celestine addressed the Zephyrian people directly through underground communication networks. She spoke of her own experience watching an empire fall, and the hope that could emerge from apparent destruction. Captain Lisa Morgan coordinated with sympathetic officials to begin secret evacuation preparations. Small groups of civilians were quietly relocated to safe sectors while the Emperor remained oblivious to the growing movement. The mission revealed that true strength came not from military might or technological superiority, but from the willingness to help others. Even when they showed only contempt, the Velinari Empire was gone, but something better had taken its place. The new civilization built on cooperation, humility, and hope represented humanity's greatest achievement. They had taken their former enemies and created partners in a shared struggle for survival. Princess Celestine reflected on her journey from imperial nobility to refugee leader to ambassador of cooperation. The loss of everything she had known led to discovery of what really mattered in the universe. Story of the Fallen Empire became a teaching tool for other civilizations, showing that pride and arrogance led only to destruction, while cooperation and humility offered paths to survival and growth. The Warning continued its mission, seeking other threatened species and offering the wisdom learned through catastrophe. The alliance between humans and Velinari had become the foundation for a new type of galactic civilization. The final transmission from the Warning carried a message of hope to all who would listen. True victory was not conquest, but cooperation. True strength was not dominance, but the willingness to help others survive and thrive. The Velinari Empire had fallen, but from its ashes grew something far more valuable than any amount of territory or technology. A partnership between species that valued life over pride and cooperation over conquest had emerged from cosmic destruction.